I want to begin this morning with a series of questions, and we are, like I say, going to begin a new series today on victory attitudes. So the questions that I'm going to ask are kind of to direct our minds in preparing for thinking about victory attitudes. To begin with, why are you here? Why are you here today? What'd you come for? What got you out of bed? I know some of you wanted to beat the marathon and get here, but what brought you here? What motivated you to come? That's really a significant question, and it deserves thought. It deserves your processing that. Why am I here? Another question. You are here today, and you are giving, just by your being here, you're giving some form of a witness, some form of a testimony, of a spiritual statement. So is the spiritual statement that you're showing today one of a victim or a victor? Is the statement that people are hearing from me as I'm here with others one of spiritual victory, or am I a victim of life? What are people hearing? Now, what do you expect to happen to you because you're a part of this gathering today? What are you expecting is going to happen to you? Very little, because, just very little ever happens to me. What do you expect? If you expect little, guess what? You will get your expectation. But what are you expecting to happen? Is it going to be positive? Are you going to leave here today and say, man, I'm sure glad that I went, that I was there, that I was a part of that assembly? Or will you say, oh, that's an hour of my life. Okay, I'll be realistic. That's an hour and 15 minutes of my life I'm not going to get back. What do you expect to happen? Well, let's cut to the chase. Let's cut to the real question. Where's your life headed? Because that really determines your answer to all the rest of those. Where is your life headed? What are your goals? I love the fact that Chris sent that song, To Canaan's Land. I'm on my way. And I put that in the PowerPoint, and PowerPoint does some weird things now. It offers you videos that you can insert based upon what you typed. I typed in, To Canaan's Land, I'm on my way, and it showed a video of a roadway and all of the markings buzzing by. I thought, that's really right. We've set our direction. We've set our path. We've looked at the map. We know where we're going. But where is your life headed? The instruments went out on a commercial plane, and the pilot contacted the control tower and asked about his position. They asked about his position. He says, I don't know where we are, but wherever we're headed, we're making great time. And I think sometimes that's how we live our life. We haven't thought about where we're headed. We haven't thought about what's the direction of my life. What is most important? All we know is, man, we're making good time. We are busy. But where are we going? The pilot knew he had speed, but he'd lost his sense of direction. Is it possible that for God's children to engage in activities and movement, to have speed, but lose sight of our direction? Where are we supposed to be headed? I suppose it's been almost 30 years now that Stephen Covey wrote his book, The 7 Signs of Successful People. And he is the one who is credited with making this statement. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And I guess he probably made millions off of that. Wished I'd thought of that. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. But you know what, brothers and sisters, that really is our main thing. We've got to keep the main thing the main thing. And that is our main thing. Problem is, we forget what the main thing is. When it comes to your walk with the Lord, when it comes to your spiritual journey, what is the main thing? What is the main thing? Is it worship? Is it coming together, gathering of other people, It's estimated that 70% of church members believe worship is the main thing. It's the main thing. And as evidence to that, all you have to do is to look at the fact that the majority of congregational funds go towards worship. Facilities, staff, buildings, furnishings, PA systems. 70%. And Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 25 does say that we're not supposed to forsake the assembling of ourselves together, as the habit of some is. It is important, but is it the main thing? Is it the main thing? You know, when we think it is the main thing, that's about all we want to do in our service to Christ. And so we feel satisfied if we've done the main thing. Is it evangelism? Jesus told his disciples to go into all the world and make disciples of all nations, to teach them. Acts chapter 8, it says, when the early church was scattered, that they went everywhere proclaiming the message of the good news. And Paul will write to Timothy and say, you need to commit what you've learned to faithful men who will in turn be able to teach others also. Evangelism. Is that the main thing? Benevolence. Jesus talks in Matthew chapter 25 about a cup of water and clothing and visiting in prison. We also find in Galatians chapter 6, as we have opportunity, we are to work for the good of all, especially those of the household of faith. We find in Matthew chapter 15 that people with Jesus 3 days and they're hungry, and Jesus says, I have compassion on these people. But is benevolence the main thing? Is it the main thing? And then how about education? Education. You know, we sanctify ourselves by coming to Christ in that evangelism process, but then Jesus also said to teach them to observe all that I've commanded you. There's a continual growth process. There's knowledge that needs to be added. As Peter says, we need to grow in the grace and the knowledge of our Lord. And even the early church in Acts chapter 2, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. So education, learning more, was really significant and important. But is it the main thing? Is it the main thing? You know, if we're going to speak accurately, worship, evangelism, benevolence, and education are activities of the saved. But they're not the main thing. They're not the main thing. And you know what happens when we fail to process any more than that is not only do they not become the main thing, they become the catalyst around which many divisions are born. Because if you're thinking that evangelism's the main thing, and you're part of a church that thinks that teaching is the main thing, there's going to be tension. You see, they're not the main thing. Does it make them insignificant, unimportant? Definitely they're not unscriptural, but it does not make them the main thing. Let's let Jesus answer the question. Jesus, what's the main thing? And she's right. The scripture says it all. I give you a new commandment. Love one another. Just as I have loved you, you must also love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. Another translation. So now I am giving you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I've loved you, you should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. What did Jesus say the main thing was? What did Jesus say the main thing was? Love one another. Another occasion, after some of that rebuke that we heard earlier, we get down to verse 36. Jesus, which commandment in the law is the greatest? And he said to him, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and most important commandment. And then he adds, he wasn't asked this. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then he says, all the law and the prophets, everything that you're asking me, which is the greatest commandment in the law, not just the law, but among all the prophets, all the teachings that God has ever given, this is it. You love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and you love your neighbor as yourself. Because everything hinges on those two things. Everything. The main thing, which must be kept the main thing, is love. Love for God and love for others. That's the main thing. Now, here's how all this fits. How do you love the saved? By congregating. By worshiping. Oh, I know, we're here to worship God. But how much of the New Testament talks about worship as being that thing that edifies each other, that lifts each other up? This is for us as well as for him. This is the expression of our worshipful love for each other. And so when the Hebrew writer says, don't forsake that, he's not just saying, don't miss out on God. He's saying, don't forsake the ones you're supposed to be loving. You ever process it that way? When you're not apart? When you don't make getting together with your brothers and sisters a priority? That you must not love us much? How do you love the lost? How do you love the lost? By engaging in the activity of evangelism, by teaching them. But what's the main thing? Love. You ever try to do evangelistic work without loving somebody? Yeah, those are the times when we hear people say, you know what, if you're going to hell. How do you love the needy? By benevolence, by sharing. How do we love those that are justified, saved by the blood of Christ? By helping us all grow in the grace and the knowledge of Jesus Christ. So what's the main thing? Main thing is always love. There's no clearer text illustrating that love is the main thing than 1 Corinthians 13. And that's going to be the basis of our study. We're going to look at victory attitudes out of 1 Corinthians chapter 13. But for the purpose today, let's just look through this entire chapter. If I speak the languages of men and of angels, but do not have love, I am a sounding gong and a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to move mountains, but do not have love, I'm nothing. If I donate all my goods to feed the poor, and if I give my body to be burned but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy. It is not boastful. It's not conceited. It does not act improperly. It is not selfish. It is not provoked. Does not keep a record of wrongs. It finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in truth. Bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for languages, they will cease. And as for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put aside childish things. For now we see indistinctly as in a mirror, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know fully as I am fully known. how these three remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. I'm going to look at three things that are revealed in this chapter as we set the stage for our examination. One of the primary points that Paul is making in this chapter is that actions can feign love rather than being the main thing. In other words, we can engage in certain activities, certain tremendous, powerful activities, and still not have love be the main thing, the main reason for doing those things. We can have outstanding talent. Paul said, if I could speak with the angels, the languages of angels and of men, he's saying, I have perfect communication talents. I can talk and everybody will understand exactly what I say. Wow. But if I don't have love, it doesn't do me a bit of good. He says if I understand all prophecy and if I have all faith and I have all this understanding of spiritual things, this exceptional knowledge base, but if I don't have love, it's of no value. If I have an amazing generosity, I give everything I have, not some, not the majority, if I give everything I own, but if it's not out of love, I've wasted. And then he says, if I give my body to be burned, I wonder why he didn't say to be killed. Do you realize the nature of being burnt to death? Yeah. He's talking not just a sacrifice. He's talking the most painful means of sacrifice. I give my body to be burned, but it's not out of love. It's a waste. It's a waste. So herein lies the real significance of all those questions I started with. We need to be people who are continually asking ourselves why we're here. What is most important? What's the main thing? What's motivating my walk? Because all of these kinds of sacrificial, talented, amazingly spiritual activities can be for naught if the motivation behind them is not love. Illustrate that. This young girl, she's showing her grand champion lamb at a 4-H. And it's won, and now she's auctioning it off. And some of you relate to having that event happen. So the bidding, it reaches $5 per pound, and she begins to tear up. It goes to $10 a pound, and the tears just are flowing, just flowing. And the higher the bidding goes, the more intense her tears become. The winner paid $1,000 for the lamb and then turned around and gave it back to her. Months later, one of the 4-H judges was also adjudicating a statewide essay contest. He happened to be judging an essay written by the young landowner. And she wrote, "The prices began to go so high during the bidding that I started to cry from happiness." She continued, "The man who bought the lamb for so much more than I ever dreamed I would get returned the lamb to me. And when I got home, Daddy barbecued it. It was really delicious." I don't think she was feigning love to get a higher bid, but it's a great illustration that sometimes what we see and what we view is not really coming from love. Actions sometimes do not have love. The man thought the tears represented deep-seated love, and maybe they did for lamb chops. Okay. The second thing that this chapter reveals is that certain actions prove love is the main thing. Now we're gonna dissect every one of these, but in the onset, I just need to let you know, every one of these actions has to come from love. And basically, if you don't have love, you can't have these actions. For example, patience. If you don't love someone, you're not patient. Now, you may be impatient with people you love, but you're never going to be patient unless you love somebody. Kindness. You're not going to be kind without the presence of love. The lack of boastfulness and arrogance, being void of conceit, the rejection of things that are improper or evil, the keeping no ledger of wrong. Oh my goodness. The only way we can erase that ledger, burn that ledger, destroy that ledger is by love. It's the only way it can happen. No joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in truth. Forbearance. Believing, hoping, and enduring. Third thing that this chapter reveals is the abiding nature of love makes it the main thing. In other words, out of everything in this world, what's going to abide? Faith, hope, and love. But the greatest is love. That's what the book says. The greatest is love. We had the privilege of making a fast trip to Oklahoma University to watch Oklahoma Christian University, to watch our granddaughter, our eldest granddaughter, graduate as a real, just barely scraping by, one of 13 perfect 4.0s out of 365. The commencement was in a parking lot with about a 40, 50 mile an hour wind. It was a lovely day. The commencement speaker was George Nye, who I think was twice elected the governor of Oklahoma. I think he also served as a senator for Oklahoma. 94 years old. This was his 73rd consecutive year to give a commencement speech. 73 years. The president of OC and it was an interview type speech. It was really unique. Mr. Nye's main point to the graduating students was made by telling the story of the musical. You got it. By the way, he's the one who made that the main theme song of that movie. That's Oklahoma's state song, and that's because of him. He's the one that motivated all that. So anyhow, he's telling about this great musical that came from a book that was entitled Green Grow the Lilacs. The initial name of the Broadway play was Green Grow the Lilacs. Needless to say, not very successful. So they went to another city. I can't remember now if he said Chicago, someplace else. Anyhow, they went to another city, and he said they decided to rename it. So now it became Away We Go. I mean, the thing's not making money. It's, the music part by Roberts and Hammerstein, whatever, that part is fantastic, great reviews, but it's not bringing people in. So they have this big meeting, and they're saying, we need to come up with a name that's going to attract people, because this is such a great musical, but people don't come. And so he told about, they're sitting around, and finally somebody says, let's call it Oklahoma. And somebody goes, what is so special about Oklahoma? And the story is from the Oklahoma Territory, so that's That was their reasoning. But they decided, well, it's not like Green Grow the Lilacs is going to bring them in. So they decided to go with Oklahoma. But the discussion continued. That's just not very attracting. It's not going to bring people. And so I believe that the governor said that it was Mrs. Hammerstein that said at this meeting, put an exclamation point behind it. And if you look, everything that has the musical Oklahoma has the exclamation point behind the name. So his point to graduates was, you're graduating from Oklahoma. Big deal. You've got your degree in whatever, big deal. You've got to put the exclamation. That's what'll make this a big deal. You know what? You know what your exclamation point is? It's love. The exclamation point that we have to put on our lives is love. Jesus said, it's a new command. It's new in intensity. Yes, they were told to love in the Old Testament, but not like this. Not like this. It's new in purpose, because now it's the love that we show that convinces the world that God sent Jesus Christ. That's new intensity. So as you leave today, make this week an exclamation point of love. Are you heading in a way that's demonstrating you believe that love is the main thing? Is that the direction? Folks, everyone in this room has struggled with love not being the main thing. We get wrapped up in opinions. We talked about that recently. We get wrapped up in church politics. We get wrapped up in decisions we don't agree with. We get all kinds of stuff that takes our minds off the main thing. The main thing, according to Jesus, is that we're supposed to be people of love. Amen? Over the next few weeks, we're going to take that 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and we're going to glean how we can put an exclamation point behind each of our lives.